Okay, so welcome once again to the Information Security Masterclass run by Razorthorn Security. My name is James Reese. I will be your teacher today, as I have been for every one of these so far. And today we're going to be looking at breaking barriers and building strategies. Now, as per usual, part one will be a little bit about InfoSec in general and kind of like your journey through InfoSec, whereas part two is going to be maybe a little bit more content geared towards, well, a lot more content geared towards stuff that you need to know, things that you're going to come across, concepts such as strategy and direction, which is what we're talking about today. Some of this we've discussed before in like the primer, the first one that we did, and some of the other additional, and I've mentioned it quite a few times in some of the additional master classes, but today we're going to go into a little bit more in depth and just flesh some of that out. So we'll see how that goes. Right. Okay. So for part one, breaking barriers, attitudes towards people in the information security community. Now, I'd just like to caveat this by saying that not everybody experiences InfoSec in the same way. You are definitely coming into a time where information security is viewed in a lot more as a business must-have than maybe it was previously in the past. I got in 25 years ago, and the mindset around security back then was extremely different from where it is now. It's been quite a long time in the way that things have progressed and the way that things have changed. 25 years ago, we were very much part of the IT teams. It was very rare you'd ever find anybody in what we termed as IT security back then anywhere else. You know, maybe occasionally some would be kind of in the legal side of things, the odd one in finance, because sometimes IT definitely came under finance back in the day, and we were commonly part of the IT team, so technically we came under finance. But yeah, you know, that's kind of where it used to be and used to sit. Now, back then we were viewed as part of the IT department, so the view set from people around the business was very much sometimes risk, sometimes compliance. Yes, not as much. There wasn't as much risk. There was compliance teams, especially in finance institutions, where compliance was a really big thing. But you've got to remember 25 years ago, a lot of compliance in pretty much every space was a lot laxer than it is now. I mean, we're talking about a time before Sarbanes-Oxley, if anybody's heard about that. That came out of the Enron kerfuffle, where Enron were cooking the books or not being so candid in the way that they recorded stuff in their books. And that's where Sarbanes-Oxley originally came from. ISO 27001 back then was called BS 7799. And it was so different from where we are now. But we were quite often viewed as part of that IT team. And the view for a lot of people back then on the IT team was, you know, anybody, if you worked there, was you were kind of there to be at their beck and call when their mice didn't work or somebody had stolen the ball out of their mice, which was a thing, believe it or not, back in the day. Most of you probably don't know why there was a ball in the mouse, but we didn't have like the digital mapping tools that we have now in mice. So it used to be a little ball, which if somebody nicked it, basically the mouse wouldn't work. It just wouldn't go anywhere. It was quite funny. And you'd have to occasionally get the mouse ball out and give it a good clean. But needless to say, quite often that's what we were doing. We were being called away for all kinds of things. And security was just seen part and parcel of digital items. There was building security as well, but that's been around for many, many years, and that was normally part of the facilities people to handle. And that does kind of continue today. over time, as security kind of became a little bit more important, technology had moved on quite a bit. We were starting to see things like firewalls, intrusion detection, intrusion prevention, a lot more endpoint security tools, email and internet security tools. The attitude towards information security slowly kind of shifted, really. People became more aware that security was a thing, but a lot of people viewed information security as really a blocker for doing what they wanted to do. You've got to remember, at the time, it was a time when kind of access to your email via the internet started to become a really big thing. I mean, nowadays we take it for granted, but back then it was a very different kettle of fish. As I said, the technology was a lot more primitive back then. Christ, this sounds weird, doesn't it? We're only going back 20 odd years, but it was. And, a lot of security people saw at the time that we didn't have the tools, we didn't have the functionality that we do now. So a lot of the time people would request something because it sounded cool and people wanted to do it, like accessing their email via the internet and all the rest of it. And a lot of the default answers from a lot of the InfoSec people was kind of like, well, no, at the moment, we need to look at the security and how we access that. We were all very conscious about it even back then. But it didn't go down necessarily quite so well with the rest of the business. So you used to get called all kinds of things, glorified security guard, that kind of stuff. You had to build a bit of a thick skin, really. Anytime you wanted to, I mean, even down to the extent where when you put in kind of like password kind of security, so certain amount of wrong passwords, certain minimum level of characters, that kind of stuff. People didn't like it because they were used to writing their passwords down or having a password that was 1, 2, 3, or the password was password. So when you stopped them from doing that, quite often you get people who forget their passwords if they went on holiday or that kind of stuff. And they didn't really want to have to interact with anybody to kind of unblock their account, or if they wanted to do something that was outside the norm, that was obviously very, very risky, they felt, oh, well, I should be able to do what I want. It's down to you to find the technology to do that. And no, we're not going to spend anything on information security. So you used to have a bit of a hard time of it. Nowadays, things are a lot different. We're a lot more accepted within the business. And it's hard not to be when you look at the media, when you look at what's going on at the moment. There's a lot of people who are kind of getting pretty hot on InfoSec. There's a lot of people who realize the dangers that we're experiencing at the moment in the wider business world. I mean, anybody who keeping an eye on my LinkedIn profile, I do post kind of like big breaches, not all of them because there's quite a few of them that happen, but some of the larger breaches and some of the information that's coming out in the market about certain breaches. We never used to have any of that back in the day. So there was very little ways that people could really kind of reference, what was going on security-wise, because it wasn't really talked about. Places like the Register and Bleeping Computer and all the rest of it. It was still the early days in many respects of the internet. So people weren't really aware of really what's going on at that time. So sometimes when you say to them, no, I don't think we should be doing this from a security standpoint, people didn't have any way of kind of referencing it or doing any sort of doing any of their own kind of research, and you weren't hit in the media by the amount of information that you are now. I mean, even in normal media now, be it the BBC, Sky, any number of sort of channels that the average person goes on, there's quite a bit about breaches and security issues that have been going on compared to what they used to be. The Register and some of the other more techie-based news outlets, they've been talking about it for a number of years. They've even got their own little sections for security in there. And quite often when you look at actually a lot of the news and most of it is eclipsed by the security news that you see. So it's kind of very much in people's faces. So people have come to accept and come to terms with the fact that security is something that needs to be done. Compliance and regulation has also played quite a significant part in that. But, you know, you can't put regulations or force frameworks on people who don't want them. So sometimes when you wanted to do things, or when you had to meet a specific compliance, people would kind of resist it because they don't want to feel like they're being stopped from doing something they feel they should be doing, which is a bit of a tough one. So we as professionals, you know, we had to develop quite a thick skin, and we'd still do even today, because there's always that that kind of battle between, you know, what the business wants to do and what we're looking at from a security standpoint in what we think business should be considering and doing. You know, one of the things that we're going to be talking about at some point on our channel, I've got it in the kind of lineup, is about budgets and security budgets. You know, as a general rule, security budgets between 5 and 10% of the IT budget, which, if you've got a massive IT budget, it's probably a reasonable amount of money. If you don't have a particularly big IT budget, say £1 million, which is not a massive amount, you know, you're only looking at 5-10% of that. That's one GRC tool, and boom, you've blown your budget. Or license for a specific solution, and boom, you've blown your budget. So, you know, things are definitely changing, and the attitudes are changing. But you're still going to meet a lot of resistance with what you're doing, especially when you're talking around the risk aspects of what you're doing. And you'll have it turned on you as well. You'll have people say, well, what's the risk? Why should I be concerned about the security issue? What's the risk behind it? And they'll want you to convince them on why you foresee something as a risk. This is why I list in my must-haves for skill sets some of the softer skills being things like communication, psychology, because more often than not, you're in a constant battle of working kind of hearts and minds to show them that as a security person, you're not there to stop the organization from working. You're there to protect the organization and its critical assets and its critical people. But people outside of security don't always see it that way. They see you as basically preventing them from doing something they desperately want to do. And when there's disagreement, sometimes that breeds argument, and so on and so forth. And that's how sometimes, if you've been in InfoSec for any length of time, you would have seen that there's this constant battle, and you end up having quite a few heated debates with things like project managers, business heads, heads of departments, that kind of thing. So really, you kind of got to learn in many respects how to approach these people and how to communicate with them and how to negotiate with them what you want to do. It's important to learn. This is why I say things like Chris Voss's Never Split the Difference. It's a great book. NLP, Neuro-Linguistic Programming, for those of you who don't know what that is. All of these kind of books will provide you with some really good skills and really good ways of kind of negotiating, communicating with people, deflecting people who are obviously trying to get in the way of things. There's always a project manager, for instance, who's on a very tight budget. They're on a very tight time scale. And they've suddenly found out that security is there to, as part of the sign-off, and they weren't told that in the early days of the actual project itself. So it can breed quite a bit of arguments, is probably the best way. So you just need to be a little bit savvy. There are still people out there that can be quite hostile to security and security people. And you need to understand, it's usually not you they're annoyed about, unless you've got a massive personality clash with that individual, because that does happen too. they're just exasperated because of the situation. They're exasperated because they don't see why they can't complete something they've been told they need to do without getting somebody else to have the sign off. In most projects, you'll have quite a few people who need to sign it off at the end in order for something to go live or something to occur. Security people can be quite fact-based and information-based in some of the ways that they interact with people. So sometimes people feel they're being grilled a bit by an InfoSec person. It's kind of like being a policeman and interviewing somebody in a room. They get exasperated because the policeman is trying to communicate to them what they need to know. Why were you doing something? What are your, where were you? Why were you there? That kind of thing. And nobody likes to be asked those types of questions. And whilst we don't ask the same questions, obviously, we do tend to ask similar questions like, what is it you're looking to do? What are the reasons behind it? Okay, we've had a penetration test and we've found that there's at least 5 or 6 really serious flaws in this product. And I know you want to go live next week, but you need to get the developers to go in and fix all of this. Otherwise, I'm not going to sign it off. Boom. Quite often there's an immediate argument there. So always when you're in InfoSec, try to get in, and when you're working your hearts and minds with the people around you, also start working on that with the bosses. A lot of the time, the bosses do understand the reasoning behind it a lot better than some of the middle management. The middle management people, they quite often see security people as a massive, massive block. Business owners and C-suite, they understand what the implications are in the event of a security issue, and there's a real danger that those individuals could end up being on the chopping block. We've seen it in loads of times in the media. Big event kicks off. The CEO then has to answer to the shareholders, the business owners, even their own staff, and obviously the customers and the public at large, who, they've got to take responsibility for a situation that they didn't cause, but because they're in charge of everything, they have to take the fall. They have to accept the responsibility. So this is why I tend to work from a top-down approach. I speak to the people who are around me as well. I'm not silly, but I do talk quite extensively with that C-suite on a regular basis whenever I'm doing any consultancy or I'm speaking to somebody about security in an organization, so they can kind of almost champion the cause as to why you're doing something, because that's the question you'll get asked most. Why are you coming? Why are you sitting in this room and asking me to do a penetration test? I haven't catered for the fact that I need to have a penetration test, and now you're trying to tell me I need to find 10 grand, 15 grand, 13 grand, however much it may well be, so I'll get your sign off for the project. Can't you just sign it off and just look at it and tell me how secure it is and then sign it off? And it's like, well, no, it doesn't work that way. So yeah, it is a bit of a constant battle in this game, but keeping cool, and definitely keep a cool head. Don't get dragged into arguments. State your facts. Make sure your facts are correct. As one of my favorite programs did a wonderful skit on Futurama, in the bureaucracy bureau, which isn't a great sort of like way to look at what I'm saying. It's actually completely opposite from what I'm saying. But the line of, the best type of, I'm technically correct. It's the best form of correct. And it's true. You have to be able to back up what you're saying. One question we've had in, do you still feel there are still security people out there that are still no people? Yes. And for those of you out there that may be thinking, what's a no person? It's kind of a viewpoint of the older InfoSec people, definitely kind of 15 plus years ago, that we were seen as what they would term as the no men. You go in there and you ask a question, you'll immediately get a no. There are still people like that in this profession out there. But in my opinion, and I was one of those people 20 odd years ago. And I regret being that person back then. But with a bit of experience and a bit of thinking, I realized that you don't immediately say no, but that doesn't mean you should immediately say yes as well. This is where you sit down and say, right, what is it you're trying to achieve and how can I help you do that? I want to get my project through. Right. Okay. So you want to get your project all the way through. It's not a problem. I can help you do that. What do you need from me? Oh, I need your sign off. Okay. Right. Well, in order to get my sign off, we're going to need to have a bit of a security review. Where are you in the, in the project? Oh, I'm right at the beginning. Okay, perfect chance for us to get involved then, and that's the perfect chance for any InfoSec person to be involved at the beginning of a project where you can be seen as, helpful as part of that project team, visible as part of that project team, sorting out problems, resolving issues, providing advisory, because by the end of that project, whatever that project may well be, hopefully you've been listened to and you've got as much security as you can feasibly put in without getting silly about it. And people will come out of that going, oh, actually, so that information security person I was talking to, is actually quite a nice person, actually. They were approachable. They didn't say no straight away. I don't mind being on a project with them in the future. And that's really the goal that you're looking for. So yes, there are still people out there who feel that the default answer for information security is no, but I'm not one of them, and I don't encourage anybody to be one of them. I mean, if somebody comes to you with a particularly insane idea, like, I don't know, let's just get rid of all our security in the company, get rid of the files, get rid of the endpoint, get rid of the file integrity monitoring, just get rid of all of your products, because quite frankly, we never see any benefit because we've never had a breach. Okay, it's probably a reason why you've never had the breach, because we've got those products and we've got actually somebody actively looking at security as well. So no, we're not getting rid of those. That's a silly idea. Fair enough. Then you can say no, but more often than not, the better of the options is to sit down and to have some dialogue. If you have to say no, and you have the power to say no, then don't feel that you don't have to, but try to do the default blank no as least as you can. My tactic is always to go in with like 3 different options. In 3 different options, it's better than a no, because you're coming to somebody with a resolution. And a bit of a tip there for any of you watching out here, maybe quite young in what you're doing. People don't like people who cause problems. People like people who identify issues and then come up with a couple of different ways to handle those issues. By following that tactic, and that works in pretty much any discipline in life, I suppose, you're going to be viewed as a much more reasonable resource, someone who's approachable, somebody you can go to and say, oh, I got this project coming up, and it's for a new e-commerce site. Is there anything that we need to be aware of from a security sense? Well, if it's an e-commerce site, then obviously PCI DSS is a thing. So, you could turn around and say, look, yeah, there is. If you're taking card payments, then there's a thing called PCI DSS that you'll need to undertake, and it's enforced through our contract with our acquirer, our merchant contract with our acquirer. So, yeah, there's a lot you can do. So just bear that in mind when you're interacting with people. Don't come to them with problems without some kind of idea of how you're going to resolve them. And you never know, magic might strike. Because you might go to them with with an issue that you've seen, thinking, oh, they're never going to give me the budget for this particular piece of technology or solution or, overtime to fix it. And they go, actually, no, you've got a good point. That is a problem. What do you need? Oh, I need this new security widget gadget. Oh, right, okay. Do you have that in your budget? No, not really. Okay, well, let's see if we can find it somewhere else. Let's see if we can get the sign off for it. In many respects, you need to remember that you advise first, provide different ways to deal with, people coming up with issues or people pushing back. And you'll have a much better time than a lot of those younger, older InfoSec people who had to learn the hard way, unfortunately. Okay, got another message. Do you think that people ask for something tool specific that seems silly, but more often than not, if you understand why they are asking for it, you can normally come to a compromise that allows them to do what they want and remain secure? Absolutely. Absolutely. And it goes, you have to watch out with those tools. I'm going to get into trouble now with some vendors. Vendors like to market their tool as being the be all and end all and will protect you from everything that life can throw at you from a security standpoint. They can't. There's a lot of really good tools out there, don't get me wrong, but that's all they are. They're tools. And tools need somebody to look after them, to utilize them in the right way. And sometimes you don't need tools. But somebody has sold them, they need to have this specific tool. It's great, actually, when you're in a project and someone comes to you and says, oh, I've been told I need to have this specific type of security technology. And I've looked at it and it's like 150 grand a year. And you look at it and you go, well, actually, you don't necessarily need it. And it works really, really well for how people view you when you turn around and say, well, I'm just looking at it at the moment. I don't think you need it. I mean, I've done that to clients where we could have sold them any random tool or a specific set of tools that are very expensive, but the customer didn't need it. And in order, and I've got a policy of always being honest with everybody I deal with. When you're honest with people, say you don't need that tool, they go, oh, right, okay, so I've just feasibly saved myself 150k. Well, yeah, or maybe I'll go and have a look at some alternatives for you and come back to you with a couple of others that might facilitate whatever it is you're doing. So just bear that in mind. There are really good ways to respond to people to prevent them from being the individuals that think you're a pain and that they need to circumvent you, or they need to go above your head, or they're going to get your boss. If your boss is, the CIO or somebody who's not in security, they'll just get your boss to tell you tough. You're going to have you won't be able to look at that project. You won't be able to secure that environment. And as I always said, get your checks and balances as well. Make sure that you keep track of what people have said, what people have decided, and you keep that log recorded. It's not for the I told you so. It's just so when you're coming to your risk management, or if something does go really, really pear-shaped and finger pointing starts occurring, you've got proof, you've got the checks and balances, you've got the receipts to show that, you did advise this, you didn't do it. And I know it's a hard, bitter pill to swallow, but there you go. Yeah, the only other thing I will say that I didn't learn in the early days, and this is kind of related to the way that people within an organization view InfoSec people. Try to be visual with what you're doing. With a lot of InfoSec, if you're doing it right, then your InfoSec becomes a silent part of standard process around the business, which is a good thing, but it's also a terrible thing. Because if people don't see security events or that you've prevented, If people don't see the wins that you have done from a security standpoint, and this is why risk management is such an important aspect, along with incident response, of our roles and what we do, then they'll assume that they don't need it. I've seen companies before say, well, we never had a security event, so let's get rid of security people. They're an expensive asset. And whilst we're doing it, let's get rid of some of their tools. And they do all of that. And then because they don't have the relationship with the InfoSec people, they don't understand what the InfoSec people are doing. And then boom, all of a sudden they have an event. And then they're like, oh, I don't understand why we're having an event. So yeah, make sure that when you're going into an organization, you work very hard at the hearts and minds, and you work very hard at kind of showing people that you are approachable, you're not a monster, and that you're there to help, and you're there to assist, and you're there to protect them and protect the organization. It works marvelously. Right, I'm about to move into part 2. If any of you got any burning questions on this subject matter, then ask them now. If there's anything that's going to take a little while, what I'll do is I'll just kind of park it until we get to the end, and then I'll answer it at the end. Attitudes in different countries. Yeah, there is. So different countries have different cultures. They've got different types of people. Some people are very, very, some countries are big on security. Some people really don't have this culture of security. It depends where you are in the world. And this is one of the big things that I say to all InfoSec people when they're walking into a new role, especially if they're walking into a new role with an organization that doesn't originate from the same country that they're in. Get to understand the culture of the business, get to understand the culture of the people you're interacting with. What are the idiosyncrasies? Is there specific things that you should be, preventing yourself from saying or doing where it could cause a bit of a kerfuffle? I worked for many years for a Japanese company, and there are certain ways to communicate with people, and there are certain ways that are very, very dimly viewed on if you get it wrong. And I have fallen foul of that myself in the past. But you live and learn. So yeah, there are different attitudes. You just got to. One of the things we in InfoSec are very good at is doing analysis, because we have to. We walk into an environment, we analyze it. Where are the security issues? What's the deal? Who's the person we need to speak to? Is there budget? And we analyze all of these things as byproduct of what we do. What I don't see a lot of people doing is analyzing the room or analyzing the organization and saying, right, where is the key power centers within that organization? There's always power centers in an organization. Where are they? Where do they sit? What are their opinions on security? Who do I need to work on? So, just be very, very mindful of that. I've got another one from Jack. Common theme that I noticed you mentioned about business not wanting to spend money in cybersecurity. I don't see it to be useful, or that it's scary. I met someone who solved this problem by starting a non-profit which helps to simplify cybersecurity and highlight the importance of it. What do I think about this? No, that's all right. Your typing is fine. That's brilliant in many respects. I love the fact that somebody has created a non-profit organization that's built there to help kind of simplify cybersecurity. And there's a lot of good organizations out there that cater for different situations. There's a lot of non-profit there talking about the protection of children from predators on social media, or certain types of businesses have these and they're great and they're fantastic. Problem is they're non-profit making, and a lot of organizations in the space of profit making. If you live in a dare I say, a capitalistic society, it's very hard to find a non-profit organization that's going to advise on InfoSec, because there's no material benefit for doing so. And the only other problem, and I'm going to be blunt, a lot of these non-profit organizations, they don't pay the same pay quite often as a commercial concern who is a profit-making organization. So sometimes the really good people, they start there and they work there really well and they have a really good time, eventually get to a point where they go, I want to earn more in line with what the market rate is. It is what it is. I mean, us in Rosenthal, we give out a lot of free advice to people. And I've been told before by people, why do you give out so much free advice? It's like, well, security is a very wide and large field. And by providing a little bit of free advice now and then, you're going to get customers come to you and say, I heard about your advice. It was very useful. Can you help us with this? It is what it is, but it's interesting. I'll check out that link that you put in the chat there, Jack. Okay, so let's move on to security strategy and direction. My favorite. When you join InfoSec or the ranks of the InfoSec people, at some point you're going to walk into an organization and you're going to be the only information security professional there, or maybe a small group of information security professionals. And somebody's going to say to you, right, what are we going to do? We've got these security people. How are you going to secure us? This is a prime time for you to sit down and start working through what your security strategy is going to be. And I can tell you now, every organization that you walk into will have probably a different strategy assigned to them. The reason being, no organization works in the same way. Every organization has a different culture. There are similarities, don't get me wrong. There's a lot of similarities. There's a lot of baselines you can build, but always try to keep your baselines that you use as adaptable as possible. Going in and securing and creating the strategy for a software development firm is going to be very different from going in and creating a strategy for a healthcare organization or a retail organization or a manufacturing organization. All of them will have different kind of cultures, different asset types, different ways of working, different types of people, maybe distributed people. Maybe they don't even have an office. We're working in a world nowadays where everybody's pretty much working from home most of the time, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon, for a majority of organizations at least. So, you need to be able to go into a situation and work out the strategy of what you need to do. And that's the first thing that you should do. Obviously, do your analysis and your fact finding. That's important because it's going to form the basis of your actual strategy and your direction going forward. But the first thing you probably need to do when you walk through the door, and once you've kind of got your feet under the table and you've got to know everybody, what am I securing? What are the key assets I'm securing? Am I securing intellectual property? Am I securing supply chains? Am I securing web applications, e-commerce servers? Vast quantities of data related to transactions, or am I working in a bank or am I working in an insurance firm? Every single one of those is very different. So once you've kind of figured out and ascertained what those key assets are, you can start looking at potential risks to those assets. That's not to say you've got to do a full risk assessment of the whole thing right there, right then. I mean, it is good to do a risk assessment, but if you've just walked into an organization and you're looking at the strategy, you probably haven't built a risk sort of procedure. You haven't got a risk policy. You haven't had, definitely haven't had it signed off by the powers that be. So yeah, you definitely haven't had a chance to build any processes or procedures in. You'll need to do kind of like a little mini risk kind of risk assessment. You know, are they, if they're a software development firm, are they, you know, just developing code and they're not considering security, or do they have procedures where they look at the OWASP top 10? You know, you can kind of quickly ascertain in a roundabout way risks to the key assets by just kind of understanding A, what those assets are, B, how important those assets are. That's the other thing, you know, and make sure you include things like revenue streams as well. You know, if there's a revenue stream for an organization based off of, I don't know, selling widgets and gadgets, then that is an asset. That revenue stream really is an asset. It might be made up of a lot of mini assets, or, you know, assets that make up that asset, but in itself, it's an asset. Because if an organization doesn't have cash flow, an organization is dead in the water. So always make sure that you consider what the assets are, and they could be anything. Don't forget to include people as well. You know, a lot of organizations who haven't gone through the security process, or maybe they haven't done it right, or maybe they haven't done it for a while. One of the big key points that I see quite often is single points of failure. Try to identify single points of failure at every turn. Do you have one finance officer who has sole access to the company bank accounts? Do you have one server that facilitates one particular type of database? Do you have one backup service? You know, do you have one method of looking at the logs? You know, all these things are potential single points of failure that you need to look at, determine, and then figure out what you're going to do from a strategic point of view. And this is the other thing to remember. When it comes to strategy, you could do a one-year strategy, obviously. But I tend to build a multi-year strategy, usually over a 3-year, with kind of a mini, what am I going to do for year 1? What am I going to do for year 2? What am I going to do for year 3? In sales, they term it as a 30, 60, 90. What am I doing in the first 30 days of when I walk in, 60 days when I walk in, and 90 days when I walk in? In InfoSec, when you're looking at strategy, you can do a similar kind of thing by saying, right, I know I'm not going to have all the budget to do everything on like year 1, especially if they haven't had any security before. So I'm going to hit all the key risk factors first, and then I'm going to work my way down through the years until I can, you know, get rid of some of the smaller and more niggly types of risks or issues that I see within the organization. You know, you can't part the sea unless you've got a talent I don't know about, so don't try to do it. Spend time picking your fights, picking your battles, choosing carefully who you're going to approach, and communicate that strategy to everybody who will listen. Obviously, first and foremost, the person who employed you is going to want to know what your strategy is. You know, are they going to read every word in the whole strategy that you write? Probably not. So make sure you have a very strong executive summary that kind of outlines that strategy in English, not in jargon, and try to keep it as jargon-free as possible. You know, if you're talking about IDS, IPS, anybody who's in normal business, say a stockbroker or, you know, chief of finance, they're not probably going to know what an IDS, IPS is. I might know a little bit, I might have heard the term, but they're not in this space, so they won't know what it is. So, you know, when you create a strategy and you put it forth for authorization from the C-suite, and it will have to go to that team to validate, then make sure that you've got all the detail that you need, but you have a very strong executive summary that kind of outlines in English what it is you need to do. It's important. Also, you know, split your strategy out a little bit. Don't supply people with a wall of text. This strategy is your presentation to the C-suite, the powers that be, of what security is going to bring them and do for them over the life cycle of the length of that program of works. And always make sure that you communicate to them that security is not a one-time thing. You can't just go in, implement some security, and it's going to be fine and secure for the rest of time. You need to make sure that you're always analyzing and reanalyzing your organizations and the environments they're sat in to understand any emerging risk or risks that have a 0-day vulnerability. If you're talking about technical risk, you know, if you're suddenly bringing on board, you know, let's say your organization is acquiring another organization, there's a lot of risk factors in there. So, you know, when you're building a strategy, just make sure you've got the ability to adapt it as you need to. You know, because things can change in 3 years. You never can tell. Your company might be 50 persons strong in year one when you write your strategy. By year two, it might be 1,000 people strong. And securing 1,000 people organizations is, again, very different from securing a 50-person organization, or it should be. So be careful when you're building that strategy to build in adaptable aspects behind it and communicate the need for continuous ongoing surveillance and support, because that's what you're going to need to do. I can tell you, as a director myself, as a managing director of an organization, I like people to be blunt with me. I might not like what I'm hearing, but I like people to be blunt with me. So when you're writing your strategy, be honest. It's not to say you can't word it politically, and I do recommend you do that. I have seen a few people who've barreled in with a report on how terrible the security is for the organization that they've just walked into, and get fired 10 minutes later because they've just basically gone in and said, right, all of, you know, everything that you guys have done up till now is complete rubbish. Don't do that. Please don't do that. All that's going to do is get you shown the door. My wonderful marketing person will love this. Use a bit of marketing in your security strategy. Make sure that you know, it's well presented, it looks good, it reads well, that it's easily understood, and something that you can be proud of, because a lot of people don't do that. It's a very dry document, and you know, most people don't get past paragraph 3 of the executive summary. This is where, again, those soft skills come in so handy when it comes to communication. You know, write your strategy clearly and lay it out with good pagination, and a bit of artistic license as well. Everybody likes something that's got something to look at. You know, use graphs, use images, you know, that kind of thing. It won't hurt the situation. It's also a really good idea when you build your strategy to find out what the core beliefs are for the business owner or the CEO or the shareholders or whoever is right at the top, and make sure you align a very strong vision statement or very strong statement at the beginning of your strategy in line with whatever their vision is, you know, especially if the owner is still part of the organization. Tell you a little secret, that business is their baby. They're probably very proud of that business. So when you're going to communicate a security strategy that quite often will have changes that you need to make to the business, you know, make sure that you kind of let that top management know that you understand where they're coming from, you understand what their goals are and what they're looking to achieve. You do that and your strategy will hopefully go down very, very well. There are exceptions out there, but I've not had a problem when delivering a strategy to a C-suite for many, many years, because I follow those simple principles. When you're building your strategy, don't forget your strategy doesn't just sit at technical security countermeasures. There's governance security countermeasures, incident response security countermeasures. There's risk management. There's all kinds of things that you need to do to create an efficient and effective information security strategy in an organization. And a good visual to show is your defense in depth. Some people show it like an onion. Some people show it like an iceberg. That's what I tend to do these days. By having a good visual of all the countermeasures and where they sit in the day-to-day, oh, just hit my microphone there. Yeah, by creating a good visual, they can see at a glance what it is you're trying to achieve, and it just reinforces the validity and the power of that security strategy. Now, don't forget, the security strategy isn't just there for you to get the okay from management on what you need to do. Your security strategy is there for yourself, the people around you, and your team as well. I can tell you now, when you're doing security day in, day out for the same organization, or if you're a consultant and you're doing it for multiple organizations, things happen, incidents kick off, changes in technology occur. Sometimes things happen that draw you away from working towards that strategy. You need to stop yourself at some point, pull yourself back and say, right, as an exercise for today, I'm going to go back over my strategy. I'm not going to amend it. I'm just going to go back over my strategy to make sure that I'm still clearly aligned with the goals and, the items that I've outlined in my strategy that I'm going to achieve, I'm going to follow, I'm going to do. And have a way of tracking your tasks and what you've said you're going to do in your strategy as well. It's a good thing for your mind to show that you're getting progression in what you're doing. And make sure when you do get wins as you progress through your strategy, as you follow your strategy, make them as visible as possible to as many people as possible out there. I'm not saying brag about it. I'm not saying tell people just genuinely don't care. I'm saying just be visible in the delivery of your security. Be open as well. Make awareness one part of your security strategy. And you see here a lot of people say, oh, awareness is a really, really important aspect of security. It is for two reasons. One, the reason that they're talking about, which is, making people aware of the security requirements and how to deal in certain situations if they get like phishing email or whatever. But more importantly, it can also deliver assurance that you are there protecting them, their jobs, their departments, their key assets, the business owners, organization, which is quite commonly their baby, from loss or incidents that may affect the business at large. That is what you're there to do. In many respects, you're like the big brother or the big sister. You're there to kind of look after your siblings as best as you can. You can't always do everything. I mean, for those of you out there with brothers and sisters, occasionally you turn your back and one of them climbs a tree when you're meant to be there keeping an eye on them because they're younger than you, and your parents have said, oh, could you just keep an eye on so-and-so? And then boom, they fall out of the tree, they hurt themselves, and I was like, oh God, I'm going to be in trouble now. But it's the same thing when you're in InfoSec, when you're doing a strategy and all the rest of it. Be visible, be there, be approachable, help people in their own kind of lives. I have a lot of people come up to me and say, look, it's nothing to do with InfoSec for the company, but my cousin has just found that their credit card details have been stolen. What do I do? Having open forums for communication like that, again, reinforces what I was saying in part one about the attitudes towards security. And if you can build a good attitude towards security, then people will support your strategy and they'll support your direction and they'll give you the budget that you want. You might not get it all in year one, as I said. Sometimes you've got to play the long game a little bit, but you will get to do what you need to do and update that strategy as well. As I said, things change, times change. If you've got a compliance requirement like PCI DSS and a new version comes out, version 4 is coming, going to come into play, next year, then, cater for it in your strategy. Are we going to meet our obligations for the newest version of PCI DSS? Reassess your strategy. Is there something in there that you need to do for PCI DSS that you hadn't really kind of gotten to yet? Maybe you need to expedite something from what you're planning to do in year 3 to year 2, or wherever you may well be. Maybe you just want to rewrite the whole thing entirely. You can do that as well. But that strategy is your blueprint for going forward and succeeding in that organization. Without it, you're sat there in a battle firing wildly into the smoke. You don't know whether you're hitting what you need to hit or whether you're just firing blind. So don't do it. Have your strategy, have your direction. Quite commonly with things like ISO 27001, PCI DSS, and the various different frameworks and certifications I'm talking about, you have to have one. You have to have a documented strategy. You have to have a documented, method of how you're going to handle security over time. And going back to your own careers, do it for yourself. I mean, as I said before in other masterclasses, have a plan of action for yourself for 1 year, 3 years, and 5 years. You're doing the same thing, but you're just doing it from an organizational, strategic point of view. And it's there to support you, guide you, allow you to find your way back to the path when you get a little bit lost in the fog. When you've got new team members coming on board, it's the primary document you're going to use to show them what you're looking to achieve, to get them on board. Yeah, you can talk to them about their strategy, but it doesn't mean that it's gonna go in here, especially to somebody who's new to the business, because they're trying to remember who everybody's name is. They're going to try and remember where the canteen is. They're going to try and remember what time they've got to be in, who they've got to interact with, the projects that you're giving them, and so on, so on, yada, 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 yada. It's far easier to say, look, here's our strategy and our direction document. Just, when you're having a coffee over the course of the next couple of days or week or whatever, just have a read through it. If you've got any questions, come and ask. That way, that InfoSec person coming in, and I'm talking about whether they're really experienced, or I'm talking about whether they're really green, or whether there's anything in between. They'll read through that document and go, right, okay, so that's what we're doing. That's what we're looking to achieve. That seems reasonable. Maybe they'll come up with a recommendation, like, oh, right, okay, they're not doing this. Better have a chat with them. And maybe they come to you with something they want to add to it. That building that strategy should be a group effort as well, by the way, and when I say a group effort, yes, if you're the only InfoSec person in that department, you're going to be doing the security strategy, but pull in business owners and business unit leaders. So what's important to you for security? Where do you want this to go? What keeps you up at night? Some people call these business impact assessments. And business impact assessments are quite a significant part of that strategy. So once you've sat there and spoken with the big bosses at the top, and understand their vision, understand the culture of their organization, and you've got the bare bones of roughly what you think you need to do, what the assets are, time to do that business impact assessment, or BIA as it's sometimes called, where you go to those department heads and you engage with them in a meaningful way, officially speaking, and find out what their key assets are, what their wants and needs are, what their concerns are. Because although you've assessed yourself on the main assets, the primary assets at the top, very few assets are just sit there on their own. They're made up of a collection of other assets as well. A revenue stream, for instance. We want to maintain our revenue stream of $10 million or £10 million through our e-commerce platform. Well, okay, the e-commerce platform is an asset. It's an asset. It's a business asset. It's an asset to the company. It's making them, on average, £10 million per year. But there's a lot that goes into that asset. Where is it hosted? Where is it managed? Who manages it? Is it an internal team? Is it an external team? Is it a third party? What technology is it built on? Have we secured that technology? When was it built? How was it built? What security technologies are in place on there? Are they current? When was it last time reviewed? When was it pen tested? Is it a web server? Is it a collection of web servers? Is it a web server in a DMZ with a back end and a database, hosted by Oracle or hosted by IBM or whatever? You know what I mean? So when you're building in your strategy, you're building it a bit like defense in depth and a layered approach. So at the top, figure out what's important, and you slowly pull your way down through, setting it as you go. And as you do that, you're not going to go far wrong, okay? You're not going to get everything right, but you've got what you've set out to do, which is to build a usable, an efficient, and an effective security strategy and direction for you and your team. And thus endeth the lesson. There's more I can go into. Is there any formal ways of doing your security strategy? Yeah, there are. There's a few frameworks out there that are worthwhile having a look at. Just Google SABSA, whatever it may well be. There's all kinds of frameworks out there. ISO 27001 lays out a load of things that it requires you to do. But all in all, if you kind of follow the guidance that I've given you, you can build yourself a pretty damn good security strategy off the bat. And then the only thing you need to remember, obviously, layer on any compliance requirements and the exact requirements you need to do after you've kind of built yourself that security strategy. So there we go. Strategy, security strategy specifically. So I'm going to open it up to the floor. I'm having a look at the time. We've got about 24 minutes left. Okay, Tom, he's got a very good question. What else can you do if your exec board members refuse to accept your proposed strategy and any following amendments? Oof, that's a hard situation to be in. Right, so the scenario is you've been brought in to deal with security, and you sit down, you start your work, you have your coffees, you work over a period of time to build your strategy, and then the day comes to present it to the board, and there you are in your majesty, showing them your fantastic security strategy, and they read it and they look at you and say no. Right. So there's a lot to unpack there, and I'll unpack the second part of that question shortly after I've answered this one. So if an executive board member, board, because it's not just a member on the board, it's the board members wholly, refuse to accept your proposed strategy, you've probably done something really, really wrong. Or they have no interest in InfoSec at all. They've just brought you on maybe for a tick box for a specific customer or for a framework or for a compliance requirement. That's a hard situation to be in. If they're rejecting it because they had no intention of doing security anyway, you know what? It sounds really horrible. Read into that. Do your psychology, do your comms. You've done everything you can do. If they're just not engaged, and it doesn't look like they're engaged at all and won't ever be, why are you there? Why are you there? You're not going to have a good time building security into that organization. You're never going to build any security into that organization unless they're willing to either change the way that they look at it or accept they need to do it. And maybe it's probably key to figure out which one of those it is. Again, hearts and minds. If they're refusing any amendments after that, I mean, fair enough, I get the idea. maybe you got something wrong in there. Maybe they didn't like something in there. Ask them. Obviously, I have a policy of being very, very direct. As many people who know me will tell you, just ask them. Just say, okay, I'm taking on board that obviously the strategy isn't in line with what your expectations were. So just for clarity, can I ask, what are your expectations? What are you looking to achieve? What is security for you? You'll be surprised how blunt people can be, especially to security people, and especially if they're very hostile towards security people, because you do get people like that. And ultimately, it's for you to then kind of decide if they're not interested at all, then you are going to have a horrible time working there. You're never going to be appreciated. They're never going to follow any of your guidance unless there's a change in management or they have a serious security incident. But if someone's just arbitrarily refusing to accept your strategy and any amendments that you make, then they're going to point fingers at you anyway. So what's the point of being there? You know, try to change their mind, sure. But if they're just not engaged, there's no point. You may as well use the time to look for a new job. Use the time to find an employer who is going to take InfoSec seriously. I mean, ultimately, you're not always going to win in a debate or in a discussion. And sometimes you will have to go back and change things in your strategy because they say, sorry, that's just not possible. We don't have the budget. We just don't have anything that we can do in this space, or we don't see this potentially as a bit of a risk. But if they just outright reject that strategy and any amendments that you ever make, just don't bother. They're just not ready for it. And it sounds harsh to say that, but it's true. And if you are in that situation, give me a shout. Maybe I can help. Maybe some clear eyes might help you out a bit. It's not fun when that happens. I have seen it. Hasn't happened to me, admittedly, but I have seen it. I have heard of InfoSec professionals who are maybe not ready for the CISO position, go in, do their strategy, come up with all the reasons why the strategy is going to work, and lambast the organization for its security inefficiencies or security issues, and then get shown the door 2 seconds afterwards. Thank you for your input. Thank you for being negative. Thank you for shooting us down and telling us how rubbish we are. After doing that, why would we accept your strategy? Why don't we just get somebody in who's going to be a little bit more politically sensitive, who's going to guide us, who's going to advise us? And don't forget, it's an important aspect of being an InfoSec professional. You're an advisor, okay? Advise. Fix problems, yeah, that's great, but you're an advisor. It's normally going to be somebody else making the decision whether you do something or whether you don't, on the whole. So I got another one. How do you align your security strategy with the business starts if the business strats have not been documented? Okay. Strategy. Okay. I think I got it. How do you align your security strategy with the business strategy if the business strategy has not been documented? That's an interesting one. There are situations where the business strategy is actually in the head of the C-suite and they haven't really documented it. It doesn't happen that often. Every now and then you'll get an organization of like medium size and larger. It happens a lot in smaller organizations, but medium size and larger size organizations usually have some kind of strategic document, some business strategy that they're following. It's kind of ingrained into standard business now to do that kind of thing. So all I would do is I would sit down with the powers that be and say, what is your business strategy? And then write it down for them. And when I build my strategy, I include a nice section in there about that meeting and that goal setting. And then you parrot back to them what their business objectives and strategy is, and then lead it in nicely to your security strategy that supports their business strategy. I do that a lot, whether they have even if they do have a documented strategy, I pick out the bullet points, the obviously big points that they're trying to meet. But if they don't have a strategy, they don't have a strategy. Let's hope that they can tell you what it is. Maybe you could put it in that it is a risk that they don't have a business strategy, but you just got to be really careful when you do that. People at top tend to get a bit annoyed when you're criticizing their decision-making processes and what they do and not have, not until you've gotten to know them a little bit. Okay. Should your strategy be SMART, which is an acronym: specific, measurable, assignable, realistic, and time-related? Yeah, it should be. Be as specific as you can. Be specific maybe in your year's plan. Be a little less specific in your third and 3-year part of the plan and the 5-year part of the plan, because you don't know what you're going to be looking at 3 years down the line. You can outline specific goals and so on and so forth as well. So yes, you can do it in a smart way. Measurable as well. Well, you need to be measurable. You need to find some way of measuring things, and that's commonly what your risk management is there to do. When you do your risk management at the beginning of your time at an organization, let's say you've done your strategy, you've started to put the basics in, whilst you're doing your strategy, just so they've got some sort of basis to fall into. One of the first things you need to do really is sit down and look objectively at the business from a risk point of view, because you've already figured out the assets and so on and so forth, hopefully as part of your business strategy. So, once you've got your assets, you can put some kind of measurable, piece in there to show how effective you've been. Quite often people will do that risk management piece where they'll say, right, what was my risk look like, landscape look like at the beginning when I initially did my first ever sort of risk profiling, which is commonly done over quite a while, depending upon the size of the organization. And where does it, when am I going to, obviously you're going to do a quarterly or annual check of your risk. I do suggest you do it on a much more regular basis than annual. But when you do that, have a tracker that tracks how many risks did you have at the beginning? How many did you resolve? How many did you add? You will be adding risks over time as you kind of determine them. But I don't metric on the amount of risks I have. I metric on the amount that have been resolved. And this is why you like to use the quantitative and qualitative method for risk management, because not only can I tell you how many risks we've resolved or reduced, because you can't always resolve all of them, I can tell you roughly how much I've protected you from feasibly losing through, most probable loss or worst case loss. Assignable, definitely. Everything needs to be assigned. Who's doing what? Would you do it in the strategy necessarily, assigning specifics? Maybe not fully. That's commonly what you would do in supporting documentation, because again, it could change. You can assign certain things to departments or roles, fair enough. But you've got to be a little bit careful when you assign anything in a strategy. A strategy is there to keep you on track, and it's to communicate your intent. Realistic, I think that goes without saying, really. You could write a security policy that says, I'm going to become immortal and the most secure company on the planet. You're probably not going to become immortal, not unless they have a massive increase in technological cybernetics or, genetics. but you could probably make your company as secure as you want it to be. You know, at the end of the day, yes, always be realistic in your strategy. You know, you can put some stuff in there that's, I don't like the term blue sky, but, you know, sort of difficult goals to achieve. And I do see a good reason to have a few difficult goals in there. Because then you've got something to strive towards. Yeah. And time related, well, yeah, you've already ascertained over what time period you're going to do it. Just be a bit careful of putting too much on your strategy in too short a space of time. This is why I say 1 year, 3 year, 5 years. Don't beat yourself up if you don't meet a time-related, a time-related task or time-related part of the strategy that you wanted to do. If you were prevented from doing that, you know. But equally, if you ran out of time, you ran out of time. You know, maybe one part of the strategy took a hell of a lot longer to implement than another piece. As long as you're progressing forwards, that's good. It's when you're standing still or you're not doing anything, that's when things tend to fall apart. And when they do fall apart, they tend to fall apart quickly. Fluff. Oh, I've got a fluff question, which is appropriate, I suppose, for the last couple of minutes. What's the weirdest strategy you've had to write or follow? Oh God, there's been so many of them. I did at one point do a bit of consulting work when I worked for another consultancy for an uncommon organization is probably the best way to describe it, who produced content of a 2-person in a room nude, sometimes more people, kind of business model, if you want to read between the lines there. You know, and they were a very professional outfit. You know, it was just the content that they produced was not considered always to be the most pure or whatever you want to term it as. I don't really get involved. This is one of the things I do with my strategies. I'm there to protect. I'm not there to, I'm not there to judge. I'm not there to judge an organization unless the organization is clearly dodgy. Then I will judge. But if it's doing something, that I'm, but I had to read their strategy, and their strategy was a very different type of strategy. It had a lot of standard components in it, talking about, data classification, and, the risk management was a little bit different from what I would normally do, because it involved risks that that you don't normally see in a, and the vision statement was also pretty interesting, as you can imagine, judging on the type of organization it was. But they had a lot of stuff that, in their security policy set, good example, that you wouldn't normally have. Their appropriate use policies were very different from most people's appropriate use policies. But the people there were fantastic. They were great. They were just doing a job. They were very profitable for a long time. I think they're gone now. The internet made a lot of that very different landscape. But on the whole, I actually quite enjoy getting the weird organizations, as one of my consultants will tell you. I don't tend to do a lot of consulting these days as much as I used to, because I'm running the company. But every now and then we get a new and interesting company that crosses our books, and I'll get involved. And I do like it. We've dealt with all kinds of things, from companies that build and manage satellites through to organizations that build really interesting kind of software for people, payment platforms, banking institutions. I love every new challenge, And I love building strategies for organizations to adhere to. I've got a couple of extra questions. Oh, no, I don't. It's just Tom thanking us before he left. Right, okay. We're hitting the top of our time now. I'd just like to say thank you ever so much for the people who turn up to the class, to contribute to the class, to ask the questions for the class. Please look after yourselves. Good luck in your journey for going down the route of becoming an information security professional. You can do it. It's good fun. It's not all bad. And please feel free to be in touch. And if there's any specific, and if there's any specific content you wish us to cover, or you wish us to cover more in depth, please feel free to either put a comment in or get in contact with us, and we'll be more than happy to sit down, look through it, and see what we can do. So for all of you out there, have a great weekend. Please look after yourselves, and we'll speak to you soon. Goodbye.